Okay. Um, you know, when we think of the War of the Roses, if we think about them at all, Parliament is nowhere to be seen. You've got the Red Rose, the Lancaster House of Lancaster, and you've got the White Rose, the House of York, and they're doing battle for the kingship. And sometimes there's a Lancaster Red Rose on the throne, and sometimes there's a York White Rose on the throne, and lots of people get killed, and there's all kinds of skullduggery and sinister things happening, and somehow or another, Parliament and representative government get kind of lost in the whole thing. And what happened? Edward III, who dies in 1377, had the good luck, from his point of view and their point of view, to have a lot of sons live to maturity. Now, that was very rare in those days. You had about a 1 in 2 chance of making it to 18 if you were a son. And so, generally, kings were not troubled by too many sons. But in this case, his sons did live. And you can see here on the screen the number of sons who made it to maturity. And of course, they all have families. Well, 2 of them are going to be really important for the War of the Roses: the House of Lancaster, which is descended from John of Gaunt, and the House of York, which is descended from Edmund of York. There's also another family in there related to John of Gaunt, and you can see right there Catherine Swineford. And it basically becomes the Beaufort family, and the Beaufort family eventually gives rise to the Tudor family, and the Tudor family is eventually going to win. But it's going to take more than a century to do that. The first heir was Edward III's grandson, Richard II. Now, Richard II, young boy when he came to the throne, and I hate to say this, I mean, we're 600 years away, actually more than 600 years away, but from the records we have, there was something not perfectly right about him. I don't know how he would be diagnosed nowadays, and of course, there's no way to tell from the records because they didn't record stuff which we need. But he showed awful bad judgment, and it was consistent bad judgment. So I don't, and it's a lot of it was tainted with emotional outbursts and things like that. So anyway, was he possibly mentally ill? Well, try this one. This is a painting that he had done. And on the left-hand side, you can see Richard II, and he's the one in gold kneeling at the birth of Jesus. And on the right-hand side, you see, of course, the birth of Jesus, Virgin Mary, a bunch of angels. Well, the angels happen to be wearing a little white stag. It was called a white hart, H-A-R-T, in those days, and it's a deer, it's a male deer. And the whole thing is that last time I checked, angels didn't take sides in these things. They didn't, they aren't walking around wearing a U.S. flag or a French flag or a Bangladeshi flag. That's not how angels are supposed to work. But Richard II wanted to make certain that everybody knew that the angels, and I presume God, was on his side. So this gets awfully close to blasphemy. And as I say, it's not a good way to stay alive if you're a king. In 1399, that had enough. 22 years of Richard II was enough. And and his cousin, a fellow by the name of Henry Bolingbroke, forced him to abdicate, that is to give up the throne. And of course, you can see here, this is a Shakespearean play of Richard handing the throne over to Henry. But there's a little bit of a problem here because you've just tossed one king off the throne. And by the way, what do you do with a used king? I'll tell you what you do, you kill them. Only that didn't happen immediately. But how are you sure that the next king is legitimate? I mean, kingship is kind of a divine office. So how do you figure out whether or not the next one is legitimate? Well, what Henry IV did, and it shows the growing power of representative government and Parliament. Henry Bolingbroke, instead of being like William the Conqueror and just say, here's my sword, I'm king, Henry Bolingbroke asked Parliament to make him king. And of course, Parliament assented. They were all happy to get rid of Richard II, believe me. But it's a major acknowledgement of Parliament's growing position as being representative of the entire kingdom. There's Henry IV. Henry IV had something happen to his brain where he had strokes. There's all kinds of speculation as to what it was. But again, we're talking about records 600 years old, and it's kind of hard to figure out what was going on. His son, Henry V, was, at least by the standards of kings, a very great king. Lasted about 10 years and then died of an infectious disease. And his son, Henry VI, I'm sorry to say, however nice you wanted to make, there was something not cognitively right about him. And again, we're dealing with this age gap in here, and we don't know, but he really was not capable mentally of exercising the kingship. And again, we just don't know. But certainly he's going to govern a long time. And during that long period of time, he's a Lancaster. Bolingbroke, Henry V, Henry VI are Lancasters. They're red roses. And the York family, the white roses, are not so happy about all of this. And so the War of Roses breaks out while Henry VI is still on the throne. And it's going to get bloody. You're going to have battles hither and yon. And sometimes one king's going to be on the throne and sometimes the next. And all kinds of skullduggery and just unpleasant things happening. It's right out of Game of Thrones. And so, it's all vicious, underhanded, and frankly, brutal stuff. It was an apparent constitutional collapse since nobody actually knew who the rightful king was. Or if you did, then you were on one side or the other. And so I have here, the Lancaster family was the red rose, the York family was the white rose. And off to the sidelines, you remember that thing I said about Catherine Swynford and the Beaufort family? They're going to descend to the Trudeau family. And more than 100 years after this whole mess begins, the Tudor family is going to unite the red rose and the white rose. But that's going to be after a century of chaos, or at least chaos at the king's side. So that's going to be the Tudor family. But they're not really part of this video, except to let you know that that's how it all ends. Another family takes over. Underneath all of this was an enormous constitutional strength. I don't think the Kingdom of England was ever in great danger. We know that, just as an example, 80 parliaments met between 1327 and 1400, so the government was doing just fine. And it was accepted, and we'll get to this later, that direct tax and customs had to be approved by Parliament. Also, that just because the king wanted a law to happen doesn't mean that it would happen. We're past the stage where Parliament simply is the Common Council. Now it represents England. And elections are going to occur, and you're going to have the representatives of the people of England, the realm of England, talking to the king, who somehow or another represents God and the long line of kings and all that stuff. But the Constitution of England is very strong. Regular process. By the 1320s, this is 50 years before the death of Edward III, it became accepted that local representatives, rather like our House of Representatives, had to be present for Parliament to be legitimate. Okay. And so, the furthest corner of England had the right to have some kind of representative in the House of Commons anyway. But there were and this is very much like the House of Representatives, but there were also towns and boroughs and cities and what have you, which were big enough that they were guaranteed two representatives. Okay, so if you were in a large city, you knew that regardless of what happened, that you were going to get 2 representatives, and London got 4. But this is like our Senate. Now, they're both in the House of Commons, but 2 senators per state. Now, in U.S. Congress, 2 senators or 2 representatives per large borough or large city in Parliament back then, 600 years ago. Parliament was still a court, however, and it didn't just pass laws and taxes. It could, in very serious cases, indict someone speaking for the kingdom as a whole in what's called an attainder. You're attainted. An attainder is a parliamentary bill that declared someone guilty, or you're guilty. We'll figure out of what later on. It was usually of treason, although if you go back and look, there are other charges against a number of these people. No jury was involved. You were tried by the High Court, and that's the term they used, of Parliament. And oftentimes a king or queen would ask for someone to be attainted to get rid of them because they were an annoyance. And usually Parliament went along. But what happens if you have someone who's advising the king or the queen, and you want to get rid of them? And the representatives of England think these are bad people, or incompetent people. Well, you could impeach them, and there was nothing the king or queen could do to stop this. If Parliament impeached someone, they had the right to do so, and there was nothing the king or queen could do. And if they were found guilty, they were out. Okay, which again indicates that the king and queen couldn't just govern on their own, because Parliament could and did get rid of people whom they thought were in some way damaging the realm of England. And so, and of course, the U.S. Congress still has that ability. While the Royals battle, while the White Rose and the Red Rose battle, the governance of the kingdom was oftentimes kind of sort of left to Parliament. The kings carried, to the degree that they carried out Parliament's will. But certainly you had a power vacuum. While people, the different families battled for control, Parliament governed. And oftentimes the kings turned to Parliament and said, "You govern. Okay, this is your problem. You guys pass laws and I'll enforce them." That's how it's going to work. And so the theory of government remained, however, whatever the actual process was, the theory of government remained that kings in some way had divine sanction. And parliaments were there to represent, as good and decent counselors, the realm to the king, to present him or her the issues that the realm saw, and to lay down some day-to-day laws, and to undertake some judicial functions. The kingship was still considered the chief office of the realm. Well, when there was a functioning king, and when we weren't in the midst of battle over who the king was going to be, that might be true. But we begin to see things happen like this in 1406. And so Henry IV, right, Henry Bolingbroke, has just come to the throne 60 years earlier, and Parliament refused for 9 months to vote for taxes. They had the right to do that until the king agrees to Parliament's own program. So it's no longer just a matter of the king saying, we need X amount of pounds to build a navy because we're going to be invaded by France or something like that. Now Parliament says, you want that money? Have we got a deal for you? We have these things we want, and we have the right not to vote taxes to you. Just a year later, the king agreed, again, this is Henry IV, that Parliament decides to initiate on its own debates over taxes. And of course, that's the way it is now. And by the way, it'll become the House of Commons that has the right to initiate taxes. Just as in the United States today, it's a House of Representatives that initiates taxes. So the debate occurs because Parliament wants it to occur. And as we're going to see with Charles I, if Parliament doesn't want to give you taxes, give the king taxes or the queen taxes, they don't have to. There's no sword at their throat, in a manner of speaking. In 1414, Parliament won the right to say, no, the king can propose a law, and we're not just going to counsel you. We're not going to give you a common council that says, this is a bad law. Instead, we're going to say, no. And it's going to mean no. And so the king, so it's no longer just a matter of Parliament representing a common council. Now Parliament is an integral part of government. You have to have parliamentary agreement in order to do most things relating to laws and taxes. That's not completely true in foreign policy. In 1426, remember we talked about impeachments earlier, Parliament wins the right to remove officials under the king or queen, as it will turn out. And so it's, you better be careful who you make, your treasurer or your person in charge of foreign affairs, because Parliament can remove them, and they will, and they do, believe me. The kings, of course, were not completely unhappy with the growth of power of Parliament, because in 1459, the York, in the middle of the War of the Roses, the Yorkist families lose the Battle of Ludford Bridge. And Henry VI, or somebody acting for Henry VI, asked Parliament to come in session, and let's pass attainders and get rid of these members of the House of York who revolted against me. Remember, Henry VI is a Lancaster. So that's called the Parliament of the Devils, and for good reasons. And then there's the Parliament of 1461. The next battle, big battle, the House of York wins, and they call Parliament in and tell Parliament that they want some members of the House of Lancaster attainted. This is a payback. But then they go one step further. The king, Edward IV, that's it, and he's a York king, White Rose. He's a York king, and he asked Parliament to declare invalid all the legislation of the last three kings. So that would be Henry IV, Henry V, and Henry VI. So that you're talking about 61 years of laws. And Parliament goes, yes, we'll do that. But it was Parliament that had to do it. The king couldn't just snap his finger and sign something and do away with 61 years of laws that had been passed by Parliament, representing the realm of England. Just couldn't do it. In 1484, Parliament, for the second time, now passed a bill making someone a king. Richard III in this case. And Richard III, not as bad a man, I think, as Richard I was, not as crazy as Richard II appears to have been. But Richard III was not a good man, not a good person. But Parliament and making the best of a really bad situation passes a bill making him king. Now, he's only going to be king for a little over 2 years before he gets killed. And, I don't think there was a dry eye in the house when Richard III passed from this scene, this vale of tears. Richard III was killed, and the Tudors take over, and I think everybody went. So in 1489, this is under Henry VII Tudor, courts ruled that without the assent of Commons, no law could be passed. And there you have it. Remember, Commons and Lords are different. Commons are elected, and as a result, therefore, represent the realm of England, represent the people of England. And in 1489, the courts, the third branch of government, basically say, you know what? In order to have a law, you have to have the realm of England, the people of England, agree to it through their representatives. And so all of this increase in power of representative government had been hidden. And if you read histories today, it's still hidden by the drama of the battles over the kingship. But what we see here, and what comes down to the people in the colonies of America and to the revolutionaries of America, all the things we were talking about. Some of this stuff is going to end up in the Constitution, and some of this is going to be considered to be things which we want to copy. Now, the bills of attainder, in which Congress or Parliament would just declare somebody guilty, they get tossed out. But much of the rest of this becomes the bedrock of American government. And so basically, this quick overview shows that, the U.S. Constitution and the rules in the colonies, the American Revolutionary Government and the constitutional part of government making, the U.S. Constitution or Convention of 1787, weren't just making stuff up out of thin air. People had tried and worked and processed and evaluated and judged and went back and said, well, that didn't work, let's try this. And so the Constitution doesn't come out of thin air. It comes out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of trying to get it right. And we're going to take a look at the constitutional crisis of Charles I fairly soon. Okay, everybody take care out there. Stay safe, stay healthy, and for God's sakes, do something I have never been able to do, stay wise.